Well, one thing we as gardeners learn at some point in our gardening journey is that gardens are always changing. And sometimes those are changes that we make, but sometimes there are changes that come that are out of our control. Hi everyone, I'm Erin, the Impatient Gardener. I live and garden here in southeastern Wisconsin, newly minted Zone 6A. And today I'm going to tell you about the biggest change, at least emotionally, that this garden has ever had. So in June, we will have purchased this house 23 years ago. And the garden started about a year later. We kind of sat on it for a year. And then the garden began about a year later. So when we moved in, the original garden that I always call the patio garden, that is the first garden that I put my stamp on and the first thing we did in this yard after a year of sitting on it. That garden was originally an L. And it wrapped around the patio, and it was probably 15 feet deep all the way around, and it was entirely planted in rather unmannerly ornamental grasses. They were very tall, they were very floppy, they were not particularly good ones, they were quite invasive in some cases, and it was not a look we liked. So the second year we were here, we went about ripping those out and creating what has become the patio garden, which has seen a few renovations over the year. But the first thing we planted in that garden, and actually the very first thing we planted on this property, to my knowledge, was a serviceberry tree that was a gift from my mother-in-law. So keep in mind, this is 22 years ago. This was before serviceberries had really reached the sort of peak of popularity that they have now. And although I believe some of the newer cultivars that some of us really like Autumn Brilliance, etc., were out then, I don't recall them being readily available because it was actually my mother-in-law who recommended that we look at a serviceberry. And I was a new gardener, and I was happy to have a suggestion for a, sort of small to medium tree that we could grow on the corner of this garden as sort of I don't know, kind of it was a feature. It was a plant we were going to look at out our windows and from everywhere on our property. So she hunted one down for us, and she found one at her favorite nursery. And it was, I think, just the species. I think it was just Amalacure Lamarckii or whatever it is, I think. I don't know. But I know it was not like a named cultivar or something like that. And it was a fairly mature tree when we got it. We moved that root ball around by ourselves, but I remember it was a pain to plant. So we weren't actually even married at this point. We were in mortgage together before we were married. And it was a young couple putting their first stamp on a yard and a house, and we were excited about it. And it was a really big deal. So we planted this thing. In retrospect, I think we probably did a lot of things wrong with the planting. But that tree made it for a long time. And, we didn't do any pruning on it. And it hadn't been pruned for any kind of form, I don't think, before we got it. And through the years, despite all of that, through the years, it gave us everything you could want. We had those beautiful flowers in spring, and granted, you could almost bet that if the serviceberry was blooming, it was going to rain, and then you lose them. So they lasted at most a week, I would say. But every year we would look out our windows, and it would be just beautiful. And then if it wasn't raining, when the flowers started to fall, they would sort of drop like it was snowing, and it was beautiful and charming. And then, of course, we had berries after that, and that meant that that tree was full of cedar waxwings and cardinals and all kinds of other birds after the berries. And then it did get a little bit of fall color, not nearly as good as some of the cultivars get. This was the foundation of this garden. But over the years, we noticed that it had started declining, and I would say we really started noticing that maybe 7 years ago or so. And we started noticing that the foliage just did not look good, and parts of it just did not flush out with foliage very well. And we, at some point, diagnosed it as cedar apple rust, which is something that serviceberries, which are a member of the apple flower, can suffer from. And because we have the host plant, that's a disease that requires two hosts, and we had both of them. And we found the galls on the leaves, so it was pretty clear what it was. Unfortunately, by this point, the tree was probably 25 feet tall. So spraying it with copper fungicide, which is one of the things you can do for cedar apple to prevent that, didn't work. I tried it one year, and it was well intentioned and poorly executed. Because mostly, even though I was fully hazmated up, it mostly just landed on me, which is not really something you want to do. So serviceberries are not particularly long-lived trees, and it depends what source you consult, but we saw some sources that suggested that on the lower end of their life expectancy was 25 years. Now, this tree was certainly over 25 years old. I would guess that the tree we planted was easily 5 years old, maybe more than that. So this tree had some age to it, although it was not old. I mean, serviceberries can live, I believe, to like 50 years. So it was not certainly old. So we hung on to this tree because we loved this tree, but it was not looking great and not happy and not getting any better. I mean, one of the things that can sometimes happen with cedar apple rust is that some years are better than others for that. And it was just bad every year. And then 5.5 years ago, my mother-in-law passed away, and so we really invested ourselves in trying to save this tree because it was important to us because it was our first tree, but also because she had given it to us. So at some point last year, and to be clear, Mr. Much More Patient this was a mutual decision that we made. We decided that the tree had to come out and it had to get replaced. So not only were we losing a focal point in this garden, the anchor piece of the patio garden, but we were also losing maybe the most meaningful plants on this whole property, or certainly one of them. And while I don't get hugely nostalgic about a lot of things, we were nostalgic about this tree. So this winter I went looking for the right tree to take its place. And I found it this winter and reserved it at a local nursery. And we picked it up a couple of weeks ago, and you saw it here. It was the Heptacodium Seven Sons tree. I found a very large specimen. It was 10 feet of growth on it, and I don't even know what the gallons of that root ball were, but I sat on it comfortably, so it was big. So that root ball was huge, and obviously there was no way we were going to be able to plant that. Not to mention we had to deal with the roots from the serviceberry. So we called on a neighbor from up the road who actually has a tree farm, so he has all the equipment, and he is actually the same person who helped us plant the mixed hedge between us and the neighbors a couple of years ago, because he's got an auger and the pinchers and all the stuff you need for planting a tree. This whole thing came together sort of on the fly because he was quite busy working in his own fields, and so we had to kind of work around him, and so we had him coming on a Friday night, and then he got caught up with a tree. This is to say that I missed most of this because I was out picking up a carry-out order for dinner. Fortunately, we did have it on film. So he came in actually with his spade and just plucked the entire serviceberry out of the ground. Now, I'm really bummed that I missed this because I really wanted to inspect that root ball to see what that root ball looked like. Because when we planted that tree, we planted it with the cage on, with the burlap on. We cut off the top layer of burlap, and that was just the burlap that was on the top, and that was it. We didn't cut any slits in it. We didn't do anything else. And what we've discovered, at least on this property, is that doesn't generally work well. When we were planting an extension of our hornbeam hedge a couple of years ago, we started digging in the ground, and we dug up a cage and burlap and twine from a tree that had been planted there. Now, that was a couple of years ago, so that tree was not a tree we had planted. Had been planted by a previous owner and was not here when we bought the property, so that tree had been out of the ground for at least 20 years, and the cage and the burlap were fully intact. So I think because we have quite sandy soil here, perhaps our soil in particular is not well suited to breaking down. So as long as our trees have really solid root balls, we have been removing cages and burlap from all of them. So I never got to see the root ball, which is a shame because I really wanted to take a look at it to see if something with the way we had planted it had contributed to what I think was kind of a rapid decline of this tree. Even given the cedar apple rust, It seemed to me like it should have been able to bounce back from that a little bit easier. Mr. Much More Patient did say that he thought the root ball looked quite small, given that it had been in the ground for 20 some years. In any case, quite sadly, the tree is now gone. I did cut some branches from it to try to force the flowers on it because there were buds on it. The timing of this just so happened that we had to cut it down now. Otherwise, I think we were kind of hoping to let it flower once more before we took it out. But I did save some branches from it to force, and hopefully I'll be able to force those and we'll be able to have one last show of flowers from it. So one thing you might know about me is that I don't feel bad about ditching a plant from my garden if it's not performing or if I don't like it. I did at one point, but I long ago gave up on that, and I have no qualms about just ridding myself of a plant that's not doing anything for my garden or for me. But this was a different thing. This plant was special and different. I also know that my mother-in-law would have said, oh, for gosh sakes, just rip that thing out and put something else there. She would not have been nostalgic about it at all, I don't think. So that was the end of one chapter, and now on to the next, which is a whole new tree, which is what you see behind me. So as I mentioned, this is Seven Suns tree. This is Heptacodium. And the one that we bought is the species, so it's Heptacodium myconoides. It is not one of the cultivars. There are two cultivars on the market of this that have been mostly bred for smaller size. I think they also perhaps say there's some improvements with flowering on them. But the main thing is size. So one of those is Proven Winners Temple of Bloom, which I believe is 6 to 8 feet tall and wide. The next one is Tiantian, and that is by Bailey Nursery's First Editions. And that one I think is like 10 to 12, somewhere in that range, or 8 to 10. It's like just a step up in size. This one is 20 feet. This should be 20 feet tall, 12 feet wide over time. And that is the size that we wanted here. That is a little bit shorter than what that serviceberry had gotten to probably, but this should be much wider and more vase-shaped. So it will be, I think, a pretty good, it serves as a nice block between us and the neighbors. It also sort of works to close in the garden as seen from the patio. So why this tree? Well, first of all, I don't think I learned about this tree until maybe 7 or 8 years ago even. And I will tell you that one of the things that this had going against it was that serviceberry was native. This is not native. This is, I believe, from, I think it's basically from East Asia somewhere. So this is not a native tree here, and it would have been nice to replace a native tree with another native tree. However, this one has a lot to offer for many reasons. So first of all, it has, I think, quite pretty foliage, sort of larger, shiny leaves that are quite different from any other foliage that we have going on in the garden. So there's good contrast there. In late summer, it will flower with sort of puffy white flowers. And reports on how long the flowers last vary quite a bit. I've heard they only last for a week. Then you look online and they say it's a month to 5 to 6 weeks that they last. We will find out, won't we? But probably the biggest show, and by the way, extremely well appreciated by pollinators. Apparently, this is one of those trees that you can hear buzzing when it's flowering. And then what comes after that is maybe the best part of this tree, which is these red calyxes that persist. And so the red calyxes actually, that kind of comes around early autumn, so it sort of ties in with other fall color in the garden. In many cases, it's actually maybe a bigger show than the flowers, so I think some people actually think those are the flowers. And then for winter interest, it has this beautiful exfoliating bark, and I love interesting bark. So my intention is for this to grow in sort of a multi-stem tree form, but the way that we bought this one was quite shrubby. The good news is that Heptacodium takes very, very well to pruning. However, the time to prune a tree is not when you plant it. So I did very minimal pruning on it. There was one quite bad crossing branch on it, and then there were some little twiggy bits towards the bottom that I pruned out. So my hope would be to end up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 stems over a period of years, so that we get a really nice thick trunk, as it were, or trunks on this as it grows. So on the corner, of the bed here where I've got this sort of little terrace bed, I had always planted underneath that serviceberry Hosta elegans. It's a big blue variety. It's kind of a classic. It's nothing new or fancy, but it's a good, really nice performing hosta. It looks very similar to Blue Angel. So the elegans hostas had to come out in order for the serviceberry to be removed and the heptacodium to be planted, because that whole area was going to get disturbed. So right before we pulled the serviceberry out, I quick dug them all out, popped them in the wheelbarrow, just for less than a day actually. But when I put them back in, I put them back in differently than how they had been. Now, first of all, I'm just going to say there is more sun in this location than there was when we originally planted them, because trees have been removed over the years and things like that. But there is still some shade caused by a large stand of cedar trees that are right to essentially directly to the southeast of these. And I also will say that in this area, as long as they have enough water, hostas can grow in almost full sun. But I didn't want to do the sort of ring around the rosy thing that I had done in the past, where it was just, you know, following the path of the wall and then plant them in a circle around it. So what I did instead was sort of group them into small groupings around the tree. And I did have to divide some, and some of them, I had divided a few of them a couple of years ago. Some of them, when I pulled them out, the centers were definitely dead on them, so they sort of had to be divided. So we had some sort of smaller clumps in there than we might have otherwise. But I sort of made little clusters of them. But I'm going to interplant that with Hackla, which should provide excellent texture contrast. And I might even add in a third element there, maybe something completely different, smaller, lower growing, maybe with a little bit of flowers in it, or I could just incorporate some annuals into that as well. I'll figure that out, but I know that I want the Hackla in there. However, I haven't done that yet because Hackla is a warm season grass, and the best time to be moving warm season grasses around or dividing them or doing anything like that is when they first start putting up growth, which has not happened yet. That will happen hopefully soon here. They're tough. They'd probably be fine if I went after them right now, but since I don't need to do that right away, I thought let's just hold off until we start seeing some growth, and then I will go in there. And probably the one that I'm going to work in is one called Stripe It Rich, which I am actually moving out of a different part of the garden. That one grows a little bit taller. It's a stripy one. It's not that common, not that easy to find. I think it's prettier than Aureola. It's a little bit, maybe the same size or slightly bigger than Aureola, which I think would be good here. So we're thrilled with how this is looking. And overall, I think this is probably a very good change for the garden if you take the emotional part of it out. But I'm not going to take the emotional part out of it because that was an important tree that marked an important part in our lives and in our garden. And it came from obviously a very important person. So we'll remember that tree, and we've got beautiful pictures of it and videos of it. And of course, it has appeared on the channel many, many, many times. So we have those things to help us remember it. But mostly we have the memories of that time in our life and the person who gave it to us to sustain us. And now we have a new tree, and it's the beginning of a new time in this garden. So what I take away from this is that change in the garden is an opportunity. It doesn't take anything away from what that garden was, or what that plant was, or what that memory was. It's just an opportunity to move forward and make new memories. So I hope you're having a great day in your garden and embrace whatever change comes. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.